Hi, the following content is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. If you are a healthcare provider, please consult with your affiliated institution or local ethics committee for ethical guidance related to clinical practice.
Hey, BioE 131, this is Russ in module 22. Now, this is not a tech briefing module, but this is Russ. So you're not going to get the kind of deep ethical analysis that David usually gives, but hopefully we will get you close to ethics so that we can have a good discussion in class and so you can think about these things. So this is not being labeled a technical briefing module, but you'll see that it has more of the flavor of technical stuff and less of the ethics stuff. So whatever. And I hope you're all having a good hair day. You know, hair is becoming an issue for all of us without any haircuts being available. And so re-identifiability. This is the idea that people create databases that they think are secure and which cannot have any of the individual participants be re-identified and cannot have any of the participants identified, but it's false because bottom line for this module is that sets of databases can be combined to figure out who is in a database, even if an individual database seems to be secure. So in the technical briefing module, I talked about pharmacogenomics and this database PharmGKB that we're building, and we got worried because we were a genetic database, we were supporting research, and we had DNA from subjects, and we also had phenotype data. Most of the phenotype data was how they responded to drugs. As I said in the last module, there's about 10 million locations in the genome. And one of the calculations we did, and we published this, was that even though there are 10 million locations, you only need 60 to 100 of these SNPs. Remember the SNPs, the single base pair switches? If you tell me 100 positions in your genome and which letter you have, that's enough typically for you to be unique, other than a identical twin. So that was a wake-up call for everybody because it was like, wow, you don't need a very big piece of DNA to make it like a fingerprint. Now, the thing is, just because you have the DNA and you sequence it and you know those 100 measurements, that doesn't tell you who the person is unless there's another database that has either the person's identification and their DNA, so then you could match up the DNA and figure out who the person is, or if it has enough information about that person without giving you their actual name, there's enough information for you to figure out their name, like all of their geolocations over the last period of time, or all of their purchases on Amazon. Again, not as easy as looking up a name, but if you are motivated and if you have a lot of data, you may be able to figure out who they are. And this is what this is about, particularly in the context of genetic data. So as I said, if the genetic data can be associated with the phenotype data, then you might be able to figure out who's in a study. And I'll give you some examples so we can make it real. In fact, there are examples. Before DNA was a thing, or before it was measured routinely, there's a couple of great cases. My favorite case is the governor of Massachusetts, Weld. This was about 20 years ago. He released public health records. And he said, this is great. He said, we're going to catalyze research in public health. We've removed all the names and birthdays and addresses, detailed addresses, so you don't have to worry about your privacy. And of course, Massachusetts is the home for Harvard Medical School and many other medical schools. And this was going to be a great thing for Massachusetts to have this great data set. Well, 3 days after Governor Weld released this data, a researcher at MIT who was a privacy expert sent Governor Weld's medical records to the Boston Globe in a beautiful, beautiful moment. And so what did they do? Well, it was true that the names and addresses had been removed, but they showed that they could use the voter ID rolls, which are public, and the Department of Motor Vehicle rolls, which are public, to figure out Governor Weld's age, his birthday, where he lives. And then the one other thing they had was that actually the Boston Globe itself had published a piece saying that the governor had been to the doctor on a certain day and had a clean bill of health. It was like a little public interest piece. But then they knew at least one day when somebody of Governor Weld's age and in his neighborhood went to a physician that generated a bill. And with all of that, and the bill was in the public health data, so those data sets they were able to combine and figure out that that was the governor. Now, could they do this for everybody? Well, not routinely, because we all don't have our visits to the doctor put into the Boston Globe, but we all do certain things on Facebook or whatever that might give somebody a clue that would allow them to re-identify a data set that otherwise seemed like it might be private and de-identified. This same researcher went on to show that there's a problem in the medical literature with rare diseases. So they, in this case, they went to the New England Journal of Medicine, you know, one of the fanciest medical research journals. And they had, like, the University of Chicago, I believe, had done a study on a rare disease, and they had included DNA sequence in the article. And it was long enough so that it had lots of these SNPs. Now, my colleague, by the way, this is LaTanya Sweeney, who now I think, I don't know where she is now. She had been at MIT. She went to Penn, and I think she might be at Harvard. I'm confused about where she is, but she's great. She figured that, well, let's just look at the Chicago area. Probably people who go to the University of Chicago Medical Center are in the Chicago area. So, and this is a rare disease. So when she went to the public health records, there was not hundreds and hundreds of people with these diseases. There was like 4. And then they said in the New England Journal article, the investigators had also said, oh, and this is a 5-year-old little girl. Well, now you know 5-year-old little girl, rare diagnosis. Now you know some of that girl's little DNA sequence. No, her DNA was perfectly normal sized. The little girl was little. But you know now who that patient probably was. Now, of course, my colleague didn't do anything nefarious with this information, but she did publish on the fact that there are these risks that people are taking that they might not fully realize when they provide data in such a way that it could be used to re-identify subjects. We always ask, or we like to think that we always ask patients if we can use their data for research, and we're very grateful when they consent. But part of that consent is usually some sort of guarantee that their identity will be kept private. And now there's a real question about whether you should make a guarantee versus just say, we're going to make best effort to keep your identity private. But these kinds of things can happen, and we would be lying if we said that we can absolutely guarantee privacy. So we wrote a paper about this, as I said. This is now super old, 16 years old. Art Owen is in statistics here. Jen was a graduate student. And we talked about this trade-off between genomic research and human subject privacy. So this is the paper where we did the calculation that 60 to 100 SNPs are basically unique. Any 60 to 100 SNPs are basically unique for a person. And then we wrote it up as a policy form because although they liked our scientific finding, they thought the more important message might be about what does this mean for a policy about genetic privacy. So here is I have to delete some of that writing. Here is the main graph, which we came up with. It is extremely simple, but they liked it. On the x-axis, it's the number of SNPs that are measured. And on the y-axis is I would say, a qualitative metric of privacy being low, medium, and high. Not my most quantitative moment of my career. But what we showed is if you want high privacy, you can only release tiny, tiny amounts of your DNA for any kind of guarantee. And as soon as you get up to 100 SNPs or beyond, your privacy is low. But that is precisely where we are going to make discoveries. So we really want to be out here to the far right, which means we have a problem with our guarantees of privacy, which we really should not make. And that was the main point of that article. So then comes one of my favorite stories. I was giving a talk like this, but I didn't have a great example of anybody actually using genetic information to re-identify. And then there was this great story in the, what is that UK, that London-based, I want to say the Daily Mail or the Guardian, one of those, had this great story about a teenager in the UK who figured out who his sperm donor father was. This teen was my hero. So the father donates sperm anonymously 15 years ago. He gets some money, and they tell him that he will be forever anonymous. The only thing they're ever going to give out, and this was their huge mistake, was they were going to give out, the county where he was born and the year of his birth. And he said, okay, that I come from a very populated county, and there was also many people born that year. Sounds okay. All right. So a woman gets a sperm donation, has a baby grows up to be a teenager and is interested in his heritage and also smart. There is a company that will use a commercial kit to look at just your Y chromosome to tell you which version of the Y chromosome you have. Now, I will remind you that you get your Y chromosome from your biological father. And the kid knew this. So he said, okay, I'm going to find out about my Y chromosome. That doesn't tell you who your father is. There's 30 or 40 or 50 Y chromosome types, but obviously there's a lot of people. However, this company had a website where if you gave up your last name, it would tell you other men who had the same pattern of variation in their Y chromosome. Now, the other thing you get from your dad in a patrilineal society is their last name, which is what the UK is and was for the most part. So this young man figured out that even if his biological father had not done this Y chromosome analysis, there might be other people from that same family tree with the same Y chromosome who would share the same last name. So the kid got on the website, gave his last name, which was irrelevant. It was whatever his mother's or his adoptive father's name was. But what he found out was all the names associated with the Y chromosome. And he could take the most common one and figure out, this last name that I'm seeing most commonly with this Y chromosome is probably my biological father's last name. Uh-oh, did we freeze? I think we froze. So I'm going to stop here and restart because I don't want to redo this part of the lecture. But he figured out his last name. Now he knew the county, the year, and the last name. He looked in the phone book. He found two people with the same pattern. He called one of them and said, "Are you my father?" And the guy said, "I don't know what you're talking about," and hung up. And he called the other one and said, "Are you my father?" And there was a long pause. Bingo, you found your father. So he combined the information about age, region of birth, and year to contact his father. So he re-identified this guy who 15 years ago gave sperm and thought he would never hear about it again. Great example, and I'll be back with the rest of the module.